Court documents show DNA evidence from the victim's fingernails was a key in the arrest to a fatal stabbing of a Chicopee woman.
The tragic death of Amanda Plasse has finally sparked change on Beacon Hill. 22 News State House reporter Ellen Fleming tells us what Amanda's bill will do.
On August 26, 2011, 20-year-old Amanda Plasse was found dead in an apartment in Chico, Massachusetts. A young woman full of life, working as a waitress, passionate about art and journalism, with a vibrant personality and big dreams, entered the last evening of her life without a hint of foreboding. In her home, which should have been a place of comfort, a horrific scene of violence unfolded in a matter of moments. When investigators entered her kitchen, they saw not just a body, they saw a place where events differed from a typical domestic tragedy. Traces of blood on the floor, on the countertop, shoe prints, drops, as if shattered in time. Everything pointed to the fact that this was not just a murder, but an act of extreme cruelty. Overkill, as one of the detectives later said. Amanda was not just a victim, she was a person with a social circle, friends, and goals. She had dreams, kept a diary, loved wig curls and tattoos, and people said she was more fun to be around. And suddenly, her life was cut short where she should have felt safe, in her own kitchen. The city of Chico, accustomed to its quiet river, everyday life, and student bustle, froze for a moment. Reports of the news covered the streets. Could this have happened to her? Who could have entered the house without leaving any signs of a break-in? Trust was shattered. Amanda's family did not sleep that night. Her parents later recalled that they could not believe that such a phone call could start the day, and its end would be different. She just left for work and never came back. Her friends couldn't understand. The girl they had asked to sit at their table, who was always smiling, had disappeared from the world of the living. When the police announced that the door had not been broken into, that she had entered voluntarily, the sense of security crumbled even further. If she had let someone in, it meant she trusted them. And if that trust had been broken, who would be next? The morning after the murder became a day of mourning. At the entrances to the buildings, there were flowers, photographs, and a note. "We will not forget you." But no one said, "I feel like everything is fine," because now everything was not fine. Amanda's story became more than just another newspaper article about the death of a young woman. It became a reminder. The whiteboard with the inscription, the video recording, and the fingerprints all spoke not of an accident, but of a deliberate act. And the city understood that. When the light in her kitchen went out, she left quietly. But that evening separated her from her future. And when investigators closed the door on her life, everyone who knew her began to wonder, what if it could have been me?
$10,000 reward is being offered for information leading to the murder of Amanda Plasse of Chicopee. Hamden County District Attorney Mark Mastriani announced the award this morning. Plasse was found stabbed to death inside of her apartment this time last year. But Mastriani says they are following leads and believes a reward will help them get more information about her murder.
August 25, 2011, began like any other day for 20-year-old Amanda Plasse. She woke up around 9 a.m. in her small apartment in Chicopee, Massachusetts. The kitchen smelled of coffee, and photos with friends and posters from old magazines hung on the wall. In the corner was a stack of books and notebooks where she wrote down her thoughts, quotes, and dreams. Amanda loved order, but her home had the warmth of a living person. A slightly rumpled blanket, a mug with the words, "Good vibes only" written on it, postcards on the refrigerator. That day was quiet. She wrote to her friend that she was going to watch a movie in the evening and finally get some sleep. In the morning, she went to the store for groceries and said hello to her neighbor, who later recalled that Amanda looked happy and a little distracted. Her life was not loud or turbulent, but there was a sense of movement in it. She had recently started dating a young man, tried not to rush things, and trusted with caution. Closer to lunchtime, she went to work at a small restaurant where she worked part-time as a waitress. Colleagues recalled that on that day, she was joking, playing music, and saying all the time that summer had flown by too quickly. After her shift, she walked home, stopped at a pharmacy, and bought some cosmetics. At the checkout, she smiled at the salesperson, thanked them, and said, "You have to treat yourself to little things sometimes." Those were her last words heard by anyone alive. Around 7 in the evening, she called her mother. The conversation was short and casual. "Is everything okay? When are you coming? How's work?" Nothing alarming. Her mother later recalled that Amanda sounded tired but calm. She planned to go to bed early. At around 8 p.m., neighbors heard her apartment door slam. Several people thought that someone she knew had come over. The voices were muffled, male and female. No shouting, just a short conversation. Then, silence. The next morning, Amanda didn't show up for work. This was unusual for her. She always let them know if she was going to be late or was sick. Her coworkers tried to call her, but her phone was silent. At first, they decided that maybe she had fallen asleep or gone to a friend's house. But by lunchtime, they were becoming concerned. Her boss called her mother. Quote, her mother immediately drove to Chicopee. When she entered her daughter's apartment, everything looked strange. The TV was on, the lights were on. There was a cup on the table, as if Amanda had stopped mid-sentence. Her bag was by the door, her keys were in the kitchen. The bedroom was a mess. The sheets were rumpled, a comb lay on the floor, and there was a drop of blood nearby. At first, her mother thought it was a cut, that her daughter might have fallen, but her intuition told her that something terrible had happened. She called the police. When the officers arrived, it became clear that this was no accident. They found signs of a struggle in the bathroom, shoe prints on the floor, and a heavy, metallic smell in the air that was impossible to mistake. Everything in the apartment spoke of panic, rage, and sudden death. Amanda's body was found in the kitchen. She was lying on her side as if trying to crawl away, her hand touching a knife that did not belong to her. It was later discovered that the weapon had been brought by the killer. There were no signs of forced entry. This meant that she had let him in herself. She probably knew the person who had entered. Someone rang the doorbell, she opened the door, and there stood a man she once trusted. She probably smiled at him, as she always did. When her neighbor heard what had happened, she cried, "I heard voices, but I thought it was just guests. Who could have imagined?" Since then, time has stood still in this house. The postcards still hang on the wall, and the kettle that Amanda may have put on the stove shortly before her death is still there. It looks as if life was cut short mid-sentence. The police immediately began an investigation. They knew it was a personal crime, not a random one. There's no such thing as so much rage without feeling. Someone came not to steal, not to rob, they came to kill. Amanda's family sat in their car in front of the house until late at night. No one spoke. Only her mother whispered repeatedly. She never heard anyone. Why? The silence that hung over the house was the first step toward an answer that would prove to be far more terrifying than simply, "Someone knocked."
Thanks, Nick. New at noon, closing arguments are underway right now in the trial of the man accused of killing Amanda Plasse of Chicopee. Dennis Rosa Roman's trial has been taking place for weeks in Springfield.
The police arrived at Amanda Plasse's apartment on the evening of August 26, 2011. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if it were dead. When the detectives entered, the first thing that struck them was the absence of the disorder typical of burglaries. Everything was in its place. Her wallet and phone were on the kitchen table. But there was a sense of something foreign in the air, something disturbing and cold. On the kitchen wall hung a whiteboard with notes and reminders. Among the neat lines written in Amanda's handwriting, one word stood out, written unevenly in someone else's handwriting. Rosa. It was not just a random word, it was the killer's first cry. Experts later confirmed that the inscription was made after the girl's death. Someone wanted her name to remain. Amanda's body was lying on the kitchen floor. Investigators immediately noted that the nature of the injuries indicated a personal motive. The blows were multiple, chaotic, and delivered with rage. It was a crime of emotion, not calculation. Blood on the wall, shoe prints, palm prints on the cabinet door. Everything pointed to proximity. She knew her attacker. Neighbors said they heard muffled voices that evening, but no screams. No one thought anything was wrong. The building was old, and the walls let sound through, but not meaning. One of the residents recalled, "I heard something like a blow, then silence. I thought a frying pan had fallen." This detail would later become one of the key points in the chronology of the crime. Investigators found traces of blood leading to the door and further into the hallway. The killer seemed to have tried to wipe his shoes, but left in a hurry. On the stair railing, there were fingerprints that matched the profile of a man who lived nearby. His name was Dennis Rosa Roman. He was Amanda's neighbor, a young man, 27 years old, quiet and withdrawn. He had helped her with her bags a few times, and they had talked in the courtyard a couple of times. Nothing special, but the police quickly learned that the relationship between them was strained. According to her friend, Amanda complained that he was sometimes too intrusive and often showed up when he wasn't expected. When investigators came to his home, he was nervous. At first, he said he knew nothing, then that he had seen the light in Amanda's window but had not gone in. But micro traces of blood were found on his sneakers and a thin scratch on his wrist. He had difficulty breathing and asked for water. Then the detective said a phrase that became a turning point. "Dennis, why did you write your name?" The man froze. He didn't ask what name, didn't clarify what was being talked about. He just lowered his head and said, "I didn't want her to be forgotten." This answer shocked even the experienced investigators. It sounded like a confession, like a wordless excuse. From that moment on, there was no doubt. He was the one in the apartment. His hands were the ones that left marks on the walls. The investigation confirmed that Amanda had indeed let him in voluntarily. He came under a pretext. Perhaps he asked for something or offered help. She knew him, lived nearby, and therefore did not sense any danger. An argument broke out between them, and at some point, he lost control. After the murder, he remained in the apartment. Not long, but long enough to look around, wipe the knife, and write his name on the whiteboard. Psychiatrists would later say that this act was not accidental. It was a manifestation of narcissism and a need for recognition, a desire to be seen, even as a murderer. When the news of Roman's arrest spread throughout the city, the residents of Chicopee couldn't believe it. Neighbors described him as polite, one of the guys who always said hello. He lived next door to Amanda, literally across the wall. And all this time, while the police were looking for the killer, he calmly went out into the yard, smoked, and watched as flowers were brought to her windows. For Amanda's family, it was the worst discovery. Her mother said, "He was there, all this time, right there, and we didn't even know." The police completed their examination of the apartment a few days later. Forensic experts collected everything, every hair, every fingerprint. The apartment became evidence, not just of the crime scene, but of how easily trust can turn into a trap. The whiteboard with a stranger's name became a symbol of this story, a reminder that evil sometimes leaves a signature, not because it wants recognition, but because it feels no fear. The investigation into Amanda Plasse's murder became one of the most difficult cases for the Chicopee police. It began with a horrific crime scene and ended with a confession that was more like a distorted confession. After Dennis Ross Roman's arrest, investigators began questioning him. For the first few hours, he remained silent, staring at the floor. His hands were shaking, but his voice remained steady. When the officer asked why he had returned to the apartment after the murder, he replied, "I just wanted to make sure she wasn't breathing." There was no malice or regret in his tone, only fatigue. The investigation established that Dennis had known Amanda for almost a year. They lived in neighboring apartments, sometimes talked, exchanged greetings. At some point, he began to show interest in her, which quickly turned into obsession. He wrote her messages, came uninvited, asked who she was dating. She politely distanced herself, but not rudely. She did not believe that a person who seemed friendly could be dangerous. Psychologists would later call his behavior a classic example of latent obsession. For him, Amanda became an idea, not a person, a symbol of the attention he believed he was entitled to. When she stopped responding to his messages, something inside him snapped. According to testimony, on the day of the murder, he walked past her door several times, hesitating whether to knock. He said during questioning, "I just wanted to talk. I wanted her to hear me." At the moment of the crime, according to the investigation, the conversation turned into a conflict. Amanda demanded that he leave. In response, there was a flash of rage, an instant loss of control, several knife wounds, then silence. And after that silence, a strange calm, with which he wrote his name on a whiteboard. The FBI joined the investigation to confirm the handwriting. Experts proved that the inscription, Rosa, belonged to Roman. His fingerprints were found on the marker, and ink particles were found on his shirt sleeves. This became the central evidence for the prosecution. In court, the prosecutor described the crime as an act of self-love disguised as murder. He said he wanted the world to know that he did it, not out of remorse, but out of pride. He couldn't live without leaving a mark. Dennis listened silently. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he closed his eyes. His lawyer tried to portray him as a mentally ill person who was not aware of his actions. But the expert examination found him sane. The trial lasted almost 2 years. Witnesses recounted how he waited for Amanda at the entrance to her building, how she once called a friend and said, quote, 1. The outcome of the trial was predictable. The evidence was irrefutable. DNA at the crime scene, the inscription on the board, the confession, details that only the killer could have known. Roman received a life sentence without the right to early release. The judge said, quote 2. The whiteboard taken from the crime scene is still kept in the archives. On it is a simple, careless word written by someone else's hand, a symbol of insane pride and how thin the line is between the desire to be noticed and the thirst for destruction. To understand why Amanda Plasse died, one had to understand who the man standing on the other side of her door was. Dennis Rosa Roman, 27, originally from Puerto Rico, worked at a local hospital in a technical position. Neighbors described him as a quiet, somewhat withdrawn man who always kept to himself but never caused any concern. In photos from social media, he looks like a normal guy. Baseball cap, smile, barbecue with friends. But behind this normality lay a frightening emptiness. Psychologists who studied his behavior would later say that he combined two opposing traits, a need to be noticed and a deep sense of his own insignificance. He lived alone, rarely socialized, but craved recognition. At some point, Amanda became the object of this desire, a cheerful, vibrant, friendly girl who always smiled at her neighbors. For him, she was a light he was drawn to. Not realizing that this light did not belong to him, he began to look for ways to be close to her, casual conversations, meetings at the entrance, offers to help. When she responded politely, he took it as interest. When she distanced herself, he took it as betrayal. A scenario was born in his head where he was the hero and she was part of his story. Psychiatrists called it obsessive attachment. For Roman, Amanda ceased to be a person. She became an idea, a symbol of the attention he considered his right. He didn't want to possess her physically. He wanted her to look at him, talk to him, notice him. When that stopped, his world collapsed. In a diary found during a search of his apartment, there were entries resembling monologues without an addressee. I just want her to know that I'm here. She smiles at everyone except me. Why? If I don't exist for her, why should I exist at all? These phrases sounded like a premonition. They showed how a man who had lost the line between admiration and possessiveness was gradually descending into madness. The investigation revealed that a week before the murder, he had tried to talk to her several times, but she avoided him. Once she said to a friend, "He's weird. I don't want to talk to him anymore." Perhaps it was these words that became the final push. When he came that evening, Amanda did not sense any danger. He seemed calm and non-threatening. Maybe he wanted to apologize or talk, but the conversation turned into reproaches, then rage. He was not going to leave until he felt he had regained control. The murder was the culmination of accumulated humiliation. After stabbing her, according to experts, he experienced instant relief, a feeling similar to power. He took the life of a person who made him feel invisible. It was not an act of passion, but of self-affirmation through destruction. Psychologists called the act with the whiteboard a manifestation of narcissistic grandiosity. He wrote his name not out of a desire for recognition, but to assert himself in history. In his twisted logic, if he couldn't be part of her life, he would be part of her death. At the trial, the prosecutor said, "He didn't kill out of love. He killed because he couldn't bear her living without him." Psychiatrists confirmed that Roman was aware of what he had done. He was not insane. He was a person whose boundaries between me and others had been destroyed. He did not know how to love without control, forgive without pain, or lose without destruction. In prison, he continued to write letters in which he justified himself. "She shouldn't have treated me that way. I just wanted everything to be like it was before." These were the words of a man stuck between guilt and pride. The motive for the crime turned out to be frighteningly simple. He couldn't bear rejection. He wanted to be noticed, and when the world turned away, he decided to remind everyone of himself at any cost, even if it meant taking a life. The trial of Dennis Rosa Roman ended in 2014. The jury's verdict was unanimous, guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When the sentence was read out, he did not say a word. He just glanced briefly at the courtroom where Amanda's mother was sitting and looked away. The girl's mother cried quietly without screaming. After the hearing, she told reporters, "I didn't feel relief, just silence." He got eternity in prison, and I got eternity without my daughter. The white board with his name on it became a symbol of this case, a sign of sick pride and a reminder of how a twisted desire to be noticed turns into violence. Later, it was Amanda's story that led to the passage of a law in Massachusetts, prohibiting the disclosure of photographs and details of crimes, as an act of respect for victims and their families. The town of Chicopee lived for a long time in the shadow of this murder. Neighbors avoided looking at the windows of her apartment for a long time. Where garlands once hung and laughter once rang out, now only flowers and candles remained. Today, Amanda Plasse's name is not spoken as a headline, but as a warning. Her story teaches us that danger often does not come from the darkness. It can stand at the door, smile, and speak in a familiar voice. Every year on her birthday, her family gathers friends to talk about her, the girl who laughed, dreamed, and believed in people. They say that memory is the only way to overcome fear. And when evening falls over the city, the candlelight at her house reminds us that evil does not win completely as long as the victim is remembered by name.